All right, thanks everyone. I'm thrilled to be up here and share the stage, so to speak, with such an esteemed speaker lineup. Also thrilled to be in Kauai for the first time and at a product security focused conference. I mean, what an opportunity we have. And just, it occurred to me not too long ago that every team, I'm sure, is resource constrained to some extent. You'd always love to be able to do more with what you have. And to have an opportunity like this to share best practices, that was a fantastic primer on what an AppSec training program looks like. And we've heard from others about open source security. I mean, this is just an incredible opportunity to take and just try to not reinvent the wheel, but apply best practices. So really, thanks for those that organized this great event. Just a full confession right up front, this is going to be a bit on the fluffier end of the spectrum. I'm going to use words like culture, and I'm going to introduce a term that I haven't heard yet, but it was important to us in our journey called governance. Certainly, relationships are a big part of what my team does, what we try to build on, because in general, what we're trying to do on the PSIRT team is to get engineers, developers to do work that they don't necessarily want to do. And we've found through our journey different levers at our disposal where we can really drive our security agenda and partner pretty well with engineering teams. And in particular, for those in the vuln management space, where if you are responsible for the remediation of vulnerabilities, either detected through tooling, through your bug bounty, through third parties, what have you, open source. I'm hoping to share with you some of the recipe that we've designed and we've either created or tapped into that really helps us to achieve that goal. And in particular, what we've been able to achieve over the past roughly 2 years is a rough 50% decline in the overall vuln backlog that we had, and an 80% decline in the average age of vulnerabilities. So I'm pretty excited to share our story. Just to set the context a little bit more, I work for Adobe. We build tools for creatives, for people that are digital marketing pros, and our customers expect our tools to work and to be available when they need them. Now, customers also expect to have a secure experience while using them. And there can be a bit of a resource conflict there when the same developers, the same engineering workforce is both building tools and supporting the services that you need to run your business, and you're also laying on them security work and making sure that they're tackling the technical security debt. And this story is really about how we've been able to reconcile those two conflicting and competing forces. So with that said, just a little bit more about myself. I like to use this image because I think it quickly and viscerally tells the story of what my team does. So we are the connective tissue, so to speak, between the external security community and Adobe's engineering workforce. We are the ones that are actually on the front line receiving either reports through a bug bounty, reports directly to our mailbox. My team is the team that springs into action when something really gnarly comes in. We take a lot of pride in the relationships that we've been able to build with the external security community. I feel like they've grown to depend on us and can rely on us to get the job done, and in particular to make sure that we are responding with the kind of intensity and with the right kind of urgency when commensurate with the risk posed to our customers and to our environment. One more word, about the partnership with the security community. We really feel that this is a force multiplier for us, and it really helps us achieve the other goals that you see up there that my team's responsible for. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more about the meat of my talk. So you can see here a graph, and this is the average age of vulnerabilities over time. And I'm going to point out one key milestone here that you can see in roughly March timeframe of 2015. We decided to move quite a bit of our work over to the HackerOne's Vuln Disclosure Program or platform. And from that point onwards, we really experienced a fairly dramatic rise year on year of the number of vulnerabilities coming in through our PSIRT program. And as you can imagine, you keep your resources static and dump a whole bunch of more work on the front end, you're going to have less capacity to handle the backlog that grows over time. So that's the challenge that we found ourselves into. And roughly fall of 2018, we decided to implement a more robust, mature remediation framework that really helped us to pretty dramatically take care of our backlog. And from that point forward, we've been in pretty good shape. So what I'm trying to drive at is, I'm going to go into what exactly changed, what recipe that we implemented to actually make that work. So another point of full disclosure, I'm a total sugarholic. I'm in a sometimes recovery stage, more often in a binge phase. So I definitely had sugar on the mind as I was creating these slides. But to me, the metaphor of a good homemade from scratch chocolate chip cookie really kind of continued to resonate with me as I was building these slides and thinking through what our recipe really was comprised of over time. Because if you think about it, to run a good internal vulnerability remediation program, you've got to have the right ingredients in the right proportions, under the right conditions, and for the right amount of time, and in order to get the kind of outcome that you're really hoping to achieve. And so I'm going to go into each one of these, drill down into each one of these individual ingredients so you can kind of follow me on our journey. Okay, starting off with culture. We've heard a lot about culture, so I'm not going to rehash a lot of what you've already heard, but I also am pretty encouraged because the fact that you've heard this word and other words that I'm going to talk about so often means clearly we're on the right track. And the more I think about what properties that define a good, mature security culture, things like is the message that security is part of the customer experience. Is that kind of message, is that something that's coming down from the top, that's being reiterated, as often as can be and really permeating the organization? That's something that we're fortunate to have at Adobe, and it's really helped us in our mission. And again, to me, that's a pretty important element of a mature security culture. I liked the Leaf's kind of reference to the fact that security is embedded in some companies' performance review plans. And I think that's a very important innovation that should be continuously adopted. I feel like you got to be a little careful because you wouldn't want to punish a developer for introducing a bug in software because that could have unintended consequences. But there are certainly things that you can measure, like attendance at AppSec training, or how compliant individuals are with existing security policies, things like that, or how responsive they are when incident response comes knocking on their door. Those are all measurable things that could very well be included in a performance review plan. So I think that's important and certainly demonstrates another rung on the maturity ladder. Security training. So another thought, when it comes to security culture is, how do individuals in the engineering workforce really view security within the organization? Is this a function that is largely a checkbox exercise that they have to engage with just to get the code out the door, or are your engineers looking to your security team to really provide value and to really help course correct when necessary and help be problem solvers? These are all elements of a good, mature security culture. I think Ryan earlier did an amazing job of describing what a security champion is. I think we've heard a lot about security culture, so I'm not going to go too deep on reiterating a lot of that. Now, governance. So I think if I had to choose one ingredient that really helped us more than any other, it would be governance. And before I go into it, I'm going to define the term that appeals to me the most. And basically, corporate governance is essentially a framework or a path that can help ensure that disagreements that occur within the organization are resolved at the right level. And this is important because, absent that, you can be stymied. When one group wants another, group's resources or whatever, you can't come to some kind of resolution. Then, work grinds to a halt, or you're going to have, risky imbalances occurring. And in the security context, what this means is when you have this fundamental conflict between how you're spending expensive engineering resources, and in particular, if you're going to spend all of your time and energy shipping new features, providing that support for the new app that your customer is really hoping for, and no time tackling technical security debt, you're going to have longer-term problems. And so, I submit to you that you really need to up-level in a systematic way the decisions, when it comes time to scheduling work within individual team sprints. And if you can up-level that to a more strategic level in the organization that has the benefit of real-world risk to customers and the longer-term view, you're going to be in a much better place. And certainly that's largely what we benefited from. Because if you can't do that, and if you're always stuck at the frontline engineering manager who has milestones that they have to hit, performance, that's focused on their performance plan, and did they hit their milestones, then your concerns from a security team are always going to be overridden by that. Importantly, as a organization that manages the vulnerability remediation process, you need to be able to tap into this governance framework. You need to be able to inject the risk that you see from your perspective at the executive level. In my next slide, I'm going to show you kind of what that looks like practically speaking. But in general, what you're looking to do is identify the risk that you see, inject it into this corporate governance framework that can then go up level after level after level to a point where decisions regarding how to spend those expensive engineering resources are made in the best interest of your customers, of the company, of the brand, et cetera. Okay, as promised, this is basically a sanitized version of a dashboard that we present to our CISO on a monthly basis. We found that this is a simplified tabular format. We intentionally don't have a lot of graphs in here because we want just the data to speak for itself. And as you can see, as you make your way from left to right, you start with the year, the number of issues that have been reported in, the velocity, the number of unresolved, and then you start to have a bit of a matrix as to the severity of those findings that have come in. And you can use colors to kind of call out the risk in particular. And then, we've got a tabular format here, and in those individual tabs, you can see we can drill down and answer any questions that come up. And this is important because this really provides the executive audience with the ammunition they need to go to business owners to really make those fundamental investment decisions that maybe are a bit out of balance. And this was really helpful for us. Okay, just to touch on policy. I don't put too much stock, to be perfectly honest, in corporate policy, but I do feel like it's an important vehicle to define terms, to showcase commitment from leadership that have hopefully bought in to policy. It's an important backstop for you when you go to teams that don't necessarily want to comply with what you're asking them to do, but it's not a motivator in and of itself. And for that reason, we put a lot of stock and a lot of effort into relationships. And Ryan's talk earlier on security champions, that was beautiful. I'm not going to reiterate a lot of what he said, but we have the same kind of philosophy. It's like, how do you build up individuals within the organizations that you're dealing with, within the individual engineering teams, to really represent you, and because they're privy to these decisions that are being made on when to schedule work, how far out, and they can really be your advocate internally, that can really drive your security agenda. And we really treat our security champions as extensions of the central security team. They're a really big part of what we're trying to do. And not to reiterate a whole lot, but you certainly want to make the job cool. It shouldn't just be a second hat that someone has to wear, but it should be more of a prestigious honor to wear that security champion hat. I know there's been a lot of work on building up that reputation of a security champion, and we're very selective on who can actually wear that hat, and it's paid dividends for us. Process. Again, not going to drill too much down on process, but in general, the way I think about the tenets of a really good security process, it's important to be both consistent and flexible at the same time, and you get consistency on things like how you triage an incoming vulnerability, how you assess the severity, how you are interacting with external parties. These are all should be consistent, should be dependable, should be repeatable. But you need to be also to exercise flexibility when you're actually dealing with individual product teams, special snowflakes, teams that have designed their own unique, nuanced workflows, acquisitions that may have a completely different development workflow than you do, or that other teams do. So it is incumbent on you, the security team, to kind of adapt and be flexible when attempting to inject work into their pipelines. It's also important to be scalable. Can you ingest, can you absorb dozens or potentially hundreds of vulnerability submissions at the same time? And by extension, can your engineering team handle that volume? So a couple of questions that I would just pose when you're thinking about through process, have you educated your stakeholders on what this looks like, what it's for, the definitions that you're using, things of that nature. And lastly, I would encourage everyone, as you mature your process, to train your team, and don't forget about internal but external stakeholders. I'm thinking like your internal legal counsel, PR, marketing, things of that nature, customer support. So in this context, communication. So in particular, what I'm talking about is how to optimally inform an engineering team, a developer, as to what's coming into you, what's been found. And in my experience, over time, we've been able to mature what that communication vehicle looks like. And in general, what you're trying to do is to clearly convey the problem, the context, the remediation that you're expecting, the time to fix, and the consequences if you're not getting the compliance you're looking for. And just one small note on consequences. We've heard it over and over again how important relationships are, and I would just reiterate, we've intentionally attempted to pose ourselves more as partners as opposed to combatants. When a team comes back to us and says, we're not going to be able to do this, we don't have the resources, we're under too much, we're under pressure to do X, Y, and Z, my response is typically, at least at first, how can I help you? What do you need from me? How can I raise this, above the level at which you're experiencing friction? Look to partner first and foremost. Tooling. I'm not going to go too much on tooling, but in general, what we found works for us is, as I mentioned before, we We moved quite a bit of our intake to HackerOne's program. We've also used BugCrowd in the past. But in general, what that has allowed us to do is to focus more on the back end, the remediation of vulnerabilities, as opposed to having a lot of challenging conversations on the front end that soaks up a lot of time and effort. In particular, the triage as a service, that's been beneficial to us, helped us really absorb quite a bit of the upfront load. Of course, internal ticketing systems are critical to scale, and we've been able to develop a lot of plumbing to fetch tickets, to auto-create, and to basically from the moment a vulnerability is triaged and validated, the whole ticketing aspect has largely been automated so that you're injecting work directly in the team's backlog without a whole lot of interaction. That's been really helpful for us to scale. And then last but not least, it's also very important, as I identified earlier, for governance to work for you, you've got to be able to present the data in a clear, easily understood framework to the people that can really make progress for you, so at the executive level. And last but not least, actually, I'm on my last slide, automation. So automation is certainly a core competency and has become more so to the security team over time. You're seeing this pretty dramatic complexifying trend, and while it's a necessary thing to eventually invest in, I would caution against automating too soon. It's very important to have a robust and mature recipe or framework that you can depend on, and that's been tested before injecting automation into the workflow. One last thought. So it's automation is not a substitute for a team that's comprised of individuals with empathy and tact that can not only build those relationships throughout the organization, but have the technical chops to be able to defend why it is that such and such a finding is critical, and why it's important for them to remediate within a certain period of time. Yeah, and it's tempting to build tools and fancy workflows, but in the end, it's really the people that count. And with that, I'm actually done. I burned through pretty quickly. So I'm happy to take your questions at this point. Okay, let me take a look at these questions. So what do you do about developers don't want to take the training? I think that was the last question. Do you collect any metrics to specifically track the success? Oh, that was also the last one. So I guess I don't have any questions. But Jim had a question about Flash and the evolution of Flash. Yeah, so I mean, we've declared end of life 2020, and I think we've seen a pretty significant decline in overall usage. Development has largely dried up as well. So I feel like it's well on its way to deprecation at this point. Thanks.